I told him I was pregnant and he laughed at me. But in court, I showed him something that Lena had always believed in: simple dreams. A stable job, a warm home, and maybe one day, a family to love. So when Adrien walked into her life with his charming smile and confident stride, it felt like the universe was finally giving her a break. He worked in sales at the same marketing firm she designed graphics for, and from the moment they shared their first elevator ride, the chemistry was undeniable. Their casual coffee breaks turned into long evening talks, and before long, Lena was spending more nights at Adrien's condo than her own apartment. To everyone around them, they were the picture-perfect couple, beautiful, driven, and clearly in love. Adrien had a way of making Lena feel seen. He remembered small details about her life, complimented her designs with genuine awe, and made promises about their future that sounded so real. They took weekend trips, hosted friends for dinner, and even looked at new apartments together. Though they hadn't been dating long, Adrien would talk openly about children and settling down. Lena's heart swelled every time he joked about what their daughter would look like or how many boys he'd have to scare off once she turned 16. It all felt like a romantic movie she was finally starring in, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe she was truly happy. But as time passed, something shifted. Lena began to notice the subtle signs first: Adrien canceling dinner plans at the last minute, answering calls in another room, or giving vague excuses about staying late at work. He was still affectionate, still present when he was with her, but there was a growing distance she couldn't quite name. When she asked about meeting his parents, he brushed it off, saying, "You'll meet them soon, I promise. They're just old-fashioned and can be a bit overwhelming." Lena tried not to overthink it, chalking it up to stress or timing. After all, every couple goes through rough patches. Her friends began to question things, though gently. "Has he ever invited you to one of his family events?" one asked during brunch. "You're always at his place, but has he ever stayed at yours?" another mentioned. Lena felt defensive but couldn't help wondering if they were onto something. She brought it up to Adrien one night, hoping for reassurance. But instead of comfort, she received a cold shrug and a tight-lipped, "Why are you letting people get into your head?" It stung more than she expected. Still, she told herself relationships required patience, and love meant believing in the other person, even when things didn't always make sense. The moment Lena saw the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test, time stood still. She sat on the edge of her bathtub, heart pounding, eyes brimming with tears. Despite the tension in their relationship, she felt an overwhelming sense of joy. She had always wanted to be a mother, and this child was a part of both of them, a piece of Adrien she could love, even when he felt distant. She decided to tell him that evening, carefully preparing a small box with the test, a note that read "Our little miracle," and a tiny pair of white baby socks. Adrien came home late, distracted and irritable. Lena greeted him with a hopeful smile and asked him to sit down. When he opened the box, she held her breath, waiting for his eyes to light up, for him to pull her into a hug and whisper how excited he was. Instead, his brows furrowed, and a humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "You're serious?" he asked, setting the box down like it was something contaminated. "You had to go and ruin everything, didn't you?" The words hit her like ice water. Her mouth went dry. "Ruin?" she repeated. He didn't answer. He just grabbed his coat and walked out, leaving the front door swinging behind him. That night, Lena curled up on the couch, hands wrapped around her belly, whispering apologies to the life growing inside her. The days that followed were colder than winter. Adrien didn't come home that night or the next. Lena left messages, texts, even emails, but received no response. When he finally appeared 4 days later, it was to grab a duffel bag and a few shirts. "You don't have to do this," Lena pleaded, standing barefoot in the doorway. "This baby is ours. We talked about this, remember? You said you wanted to be a dad before 30. Adrien didn't look her in the eye. "You talked about it. I listened." Then, with venom in his voice, he added, "You probably planned this. You think I'm too stupid to see what you're doing?" The insult stung more than she expected. She tried to explain, to remind him of the nights they spent planning names, but he wasn't interested in her version of the truth. "I'm done," he said simply. And with that, he was gone. Lena sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the space where his clothes had hung just days before. The silence in the apartment grew louder with every passing hour, and Lena realized she had just become a single mother, abandoned before her baby had even arrived. She curled her body around her stomach and wept, not for him, but for the dream that had shattered too quickly to understand. Lena's calls continued for days, not because she hoped he'd come back, but because she needed closure, answers, anything to help her understand how love could vanish overnight. But Adrien had made himself unreachable. His social media accounts were locked, and when she contacted HR at their company, she was informed that he had resigned effective immediately. He had disappeared from her life as if he never existed, leaving only a broken heart and an ultrasound picture taped to her fridge. With rent due and her energy drained, Lena struggled to keep up with work. Morning sickness turned into all-day nausea, and missed deadlines became frequent. Her supervisor, sympathetic at first, grew impatient. When Lena finally admitted she was pregnant and alone, her job security vanished. The company downsized her position under the guise of restructuring. Unemployed, abandoned, and 3 months pregnant, Lena stood in her now too quiet apartment, the lights dim, the fridge nearly empty. She clutched her belly and whispered, "I'll find a way. I have to." But inside, she wasn't so sure. Everything she thought she could count on had crumbled, and she was left holding the weight of it all, completely alone. The women's shelter was nothing like home, but it was the only place Lena could go when her savings finally ran out. She had sold her furniture piece by piece, hoping to buy time, but time didn't wait. A kind social worker helped her move into a small room with peeling wallpaper, a twin bed, and a shared bathroom down the hall. Lena sat on the mattress that first night with her coat still on, surrounded by the unfamiliar echoes of other women's pain. Her hand rested instinctively on her belly, now showing slightly beneath her stretched hoodie. The silence was different here, not peaceful, but hollow. Every morning, Lena woke up early to stand in line for breakfast, wearing the same 2 outfits on rotation. Some women avoided eye contact, others looked at her with a mix of pity and fatigue. She kept to herself, headphones in, eyes on her laptop as she searched tirelessly for freelance design jobs that rarely paid more than a few dollars per task. Still, she submitted proposals every day, reminding herself that she wasn't just surviving for herself anymore. Each meal she skipped, every hour of sleep she lost, was for the child growing inside her. And though her spirit was cracked, her determination grew quietly, like a flame in the dark. The December chill seeped through the shelter's thin windows, making Lena's fingers numb as she worked from her cot with her laptop balanced on her knees. One afternoon, after a short trip to the local clinic, she returned to find her meager belongings scattered across the floor. Someone had gone through her bag, taken the few toiletries she had left, and torn the envelope that held the ultrasound photos. Her heart broke in a way she didn't expect. Those black and white images had been her only connection to joy. She picked up the torn pieces and sat on the floor, quietly taping them back together. Later that week, she stood outside in the snow, hoping the cold would calm the storm inside her chest. Her coat wasn't enough. Her gloves were borrowed. Still, she stared out at the city as people rushed by, laughing and shopping, preparing for holidays she wouldn't be a part of. A child's laughter made her turn her head. A young girl threw snowballs at her father's back while he pretended to stumble and fall. Lena smiled, but it was a sad, distant smile. She whispered to her belly, "One day, I'll give you that." Somehow. And though her lips trembled from the cold, her promise burned warm in her chest. When Lena applied for food assistance, the clerk behind the desk didn't even look up. The line was long, and the room smelled of stale coffee and hopelessness. She handed over her paperwork, trying not to feel embarrassed. But when the woman glanced at the father section and raised an eyebrow, Lena's face flushed. "No contact," she said quietly. "He left." The woman grunted and stamped the paper without a word. It was just another moment Lena had to swallow, another tiny humiliation she added to the list she never wanted to make. The shelter staff offered resources, but they were limited. The few support groups she joined made her feel even lonelier. Other women shared stories, but Lena often kept hers to herself. Her shame felt too raw, too recent. She scribbled designs on napkins and notebook pages, sometimes sketching nursery ideas she'd probably never get to build. Still, she posted ads online offering logo work, digital flyers, and anything that could bring in a few dollars. She rarely heard back. Each rejection stung, but she forced herself to keep trying. Even when her account balance dropped to single digits, she refused to give up. She couldn't afford to. At her next clinic appointment, the nurse dimmed the lights and applied cold gel to her stomach. Lena watched the monitor anxiously, praying to hear that sound, the fluttering proof that everything was still okay. A few moments later, there it was. The heartbeat. Fast, clear, and steady. But then the nurse's brow furrowed, and she adjusted the wand. Lena held her breath, afraid something was wrong. "Everything looks fine," the nurse said slowly. "But, you're having twins." Lena blinked in disbelief. "Twins?" Her mouth fell open, and then she began to laugh, softly at first, then with tears in her eyes. The drive back to the shelter was a blur. Her emotions tumbled over each other, fear, joy, panic, awe. 2 babies. 2 lives. Twice the responsibility, twice the love. She lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, imagining 2 cribs, 2 sets of tiny hands reaching for her. The weight of her circumstances grew heavier, but so did her sense of purpose. She whispered their names out loud, imaginary ones, just to try them on. "I'll protect you both," she promised. And in that dim room, surrounded by quiet despair, Lena felt the first flicker of hope rise again in her chest. Lena stared at the blank document on her screen for nearly 2 hours before typing the first line. She had debated it for days, writing a letter to Adrien's company's CEO. It felt desperate. But she had nothing left to lose. She wasn't asking for sympathy, she wanted accountability. She told the truth, how Adrien left the company without notice, how he abandoned her while pregnant, and how she was left facing eviction and unemployment while carrying his children. She didn't write with bitterness. Her words were calm, clear, and filled with dignity. She only asked for acknowledgement, for someone to know what had happened. She clicked send and expected nothing. But 2 days later, her inbox chimed. The CEO's assistant had read the letter. The message was brief: "We would like to speak with you. Are you available for a call?" Lena's heart raced. She sat frozen, rereading it 3 times before responding. The next day, she was on a video call with a woman named Beth, who listened without judgment. Beth didn't offer apologies for Adrien's actions, but she offered something more valuable, a freelance design contract through their outreach program. It was small, temporary, but it came with fair pay and a promise. Lena cried after the call, not from sadness, but from the shock of finally being seen. The following Monday, Lena received an unexpected call while waiting at the bus stop, her hands numb inside worn gloves. The voice on the other end was calm but professional. "Beth again. The CEO's wife asked to meet you. Would you be open to that?" Lena blinked, uncertain if she'd heard correctly. "Why would she want to meet me?" she asked, cautious. "Let's just say, your story touched something personal," Beth replied. They arranged a meeting at a quiet cafe, one Lena could walk to, since she couldn't afford transportation beyond her bus card's limits. When she arrived, she found a poised woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and a soft smile. Her name was Margaret, and she didn't waste time with pleasantries. My daughter was left in the exact same way, she said gently. When I read your letter, I couldn't sleep. The conversation unfolded naturally, without pity. Margaret listened, asked questions, and then made an offer, a 6-month paid contract with flexible hours, working from home. Lena's voice cracked as she whispered thank you. She walked home that day with tears on her cheeks, but for the first time, they weren't from pain. With the income from her new contract, Lena finally moved out of the shelter and into a small studio apartment on the edge of town. It was far from glamorous, just a single room with chipped tile floors and a leaky faucet, but it was hers. She hung the ultrasound photo above her desk and set her laptop on a crate turned sideways to make a makeshift workspace. Her belly had grown, and now even bending to pick up her shoes required effort, but she felt more grounded than she had in months. She worked late into the night, designing layouts for presentations and campaigns. Every payment she received went straight into savings or toward baby supplies. She clipped coupons, scoured online marketplaces for second-hand cribs, and repurposed storage boxes into drawers. Each step, no matter how small, felt like progress. She stopped checking Adrien's social media altogether. She didn't need to know what he was doing. Her world had shifted, and her focus was now on the 2 lives growing inside her. There were still moments of loneliness, but they were different now, quieter, gentler. Lena wasn't surviving anymore. She was rebuilding. Though she hadn't heard from Adrien in months, Lena had started preparing legally. She began collecting everything, screenshots of messages, voice memos, email exchanges, even photos of gifts and receipts from their time together. She cataloged everything in a secure folder on her drive, labeling it carefully. A volunteer legal counselor at a community center had advised her to document everything now, while it was fresh, in case she ever decided to take legal action. It might not matter now, the woman had said, but one day, it might matter a lot. Lena kept a quiet journal, 2 entries written to her unborn children. She explained who she was, who their father had pretended to be, and why she had chosen to move forward without him. These pages were her therapy, the space where her pain turned into clarity. She wasn't writing out of anger. She was writing so that one day, when they asked, she could show them, this is what we came from, and this is how far we rose. The shame that once threatened to silence her had become fuel. If Adrien ever showed his face again, he wouldn't find the same woman he had walked out on. Late one evening, as Lena scrolled through baby clothes online, a message popped up on her screen. "Is this you, Lena Harwood?" It was from Sasha, her old college roommate, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Lena hesitated before responding, unsure what had prompted the sudden reconnection. But when they spoke the next day, everything became clear. Sasha had seen her name in a small business article about women who transitioned into freelance work while pregnant. "I didn't know you were going through all that," Sasha said. "I work at a legal firm now. If you want help, I'll take your case pro bono." At first, Lena hesitated. Part of her didn't want to reopen the wounds. But Sasha's voice was kind, firm, and filled with purpose. "He doesn't get to walk away like that," she said. Together, they drafted documents for child support, legal paternity confirmation, and back pay. Lena learned things she never thought she'd need to, like how to subpoena financial records, or what a notice of appearance meant. It was exhausting, but it was empowering. She wasn't just preparing to give birth. She was preparing to hold him accountable. And this time, she wasn't doing it alone. The courtroom was colder than Lena expected. She sat on the hard wooden bench, her round belly making it difficult to find a comfortable position. Adrien strolled in 20 minutes late, wearing an expensive suit and smirking like he'd already won. He didn't glance at her. Instead, he whispered something to his lawyer and chuckled. Lena inhaled slowly, trying to steady her nerves. Sasha gave her a reassuring nod. This wasn't just about money or justice. This was about respect, something Lena hadn't received from him in a very long time. When Adrien was asked to speak, he scoffed. "This woman is trying to trap me. I want a paternity test. There's no proof those babies are mine." The judge raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Lena stood, calm but resolute, and handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff. Inside was a notarized lab report, DNA collected from Adrien's discarded coffee cup weeks earlier, matched against her amniotic fluid test. The results were undeniable. The courtroom fell silent. Adrien's smirk faltered. Lena sat back down slowly, her hand resting on her stomach, knowing this was only the beginning, but it was a powerful start. The judge flipped through the results silently. Adrien shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening on the edge of the defense table. Lena watched his expression closely, eyes darting, a muscle twitching in his jaw, the false confidence slowly unraveling. When the judge finally looked up, his voice was firm. "Mr. Connolly, this report confirms you are the biological father of both unborn children. Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" Adrien opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time since Lena had known him, he looked small, like a man cornered by truth. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Adrien just shook his head, clearly overwhelmed. The courtroom remained still, everyone holding their breath. Lena sat straight, spine aligned with quiet strength. This moment wasn't about vengeance, it was about validation. She had walked through abandonment, humiliation, and struggle, and still found her way here. When court adjourned for recess, Sasha smiled gently. "We just turned the tide," she whispered. Lena didn't respond right away. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. For once, her silence wasn't about grief, it was about peace. After the recess, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. A few people had wandered in, reporters from small local outlets, curious onlookers, maybe even co-workers who had caught wind of the case. The bailiff called for order, but the air felt heavier now. Adrien sat with his arms crossed, the smirk entirely gone. When asked again if he intended to contest paternity, he said no. "I want a new lawyer," he mumbled, but it was too late. The court continued. Sasha stepped forward with additional documentation, messages Adrien had sent Lena about children before she was pregnant, voice notes, even the names they had jokingly discussed. The evidence painted a story not just of paternity, but of intent, of a man who once wanted this life, then fled when it became real. When the judge announced temporary financial provisions pending full custody and support arrangements, a collective gasp echoed through the back row. Adrien's reputation, once so carefully maintained, was unraveling in public. As Lena gathered her documents, she caught a glimpse of him watching her, not with anger, but with something more bitter. Regret, perhaps. But by then, she had stopped needing anything from his eyes. She had her own truth to carry now. Outside the courthouse, a reporter tried to approach her, asking if she'd give a statement. Lena declined politely and kept walking, her coat wrapped tightly around her. Sasha followed, holding a folder under one arm. "They'll write about it," she said. "They always do when the man's the one who falls." Lena paused. "Let them," she replied. "But only if they tell the full story." Over the next few days, murmurs about Adrien spread through their old company and beyond. The CEO released a brief statement emphasizing the organization's support for accountability and transparency, subtly distancing the firm from Adrien entirely. More than once, Lena found herself tagged in vague posts on social media, people who remembered her from school or work, writing comments like, "Did you hear what she did?" But to her surprise, many were supportive. Messages poured in from other women who had been left, silenced, ignored. "Thank you for standing up," one woman wrote. "I was too afraid." Lena read every single message, often with tears in her eyes. Her pain had become something else now, something useful, maybe even powerful. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was becoming a voice. When the court reconvened a month later, Lena was ready. She wore a soft blue dress that stretched over her now very visible bump, her hair tied back, her presence calm. The judge reviewed all submitted documents, including Adrien's financials, which showed more than enough capacity for full child support, plus back payments for prenatal care. You are to provide full financial support for both children, retroactive to the beginning of Ms. Harwood's second trimester, he ruled. You will also reimburse her legal expenses in full. Adrien's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. His voice, when he responded, was barely above a whisper. The final gavel came down like thunder. Lena didn't cheer or smile. She just closed her eyes again and let the sound settle into her chest like a heartbeat. This wasn't a victory parade. This was a confirmation of what she had always known, that her story mattered, that her truth deserved to be heard. Outside, she leaned against the courthouse wall and looked up at the sky, which was breaking open with early spring sunlight. Her babies kicked softly inside her. She rubbed her stomach and whispered, "We did it." But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. It didn't take long for Adrien's professional world to implode. A major client backed out of a pending deal once the court transcripts were published online. His LinkedIn profile quietly disappeared. A former colleague anonymously shared screenshots of his past inappropriate comments in the workplace, and before long, a storm brewed around his name. Companies began to distance themselves. He released a statement denying all wrongdoing, blaming a personal vendetta, but the damage was done. His once polished image now carried the weight of his actions, no longer rumors, but confirmed. Lena stayed silent through it all. When asked for interviews, she declined. She didn't need revenge or fame. She had work to do. With the court's support and Sasha's guidance, she began channeling her experience into something new. She joined a local coalition that helped single mothers navigate legal systems. She shared resources, answered questions, even sat in back rows of other hearings just to offer silent solidarity. Every time a woman reached out to her, she responded. Not as a victim. Not as a warrior. But as a mother, a survivor, and someone who understood how it felt to be humiliated and still choose to rise. With the court behind her and the twins due in a few weeks, Lena shifted her focus fully to preparing for motherhood. Her apartment, though small, had transformed. She painted the walls a soft, calming gray and hung string lights above two small cribs she'd found online for free. Each day, she folded tiny onesies, sorted bottles, and double-checked her hospital bag. The nursery wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. She played classical music in the evenings and read aloud from her old childhood books, her voice soothing, even when no one else could hear it. As her body slowed down, Lena's heart sped up. The weight of responsibility loomed, but so did the excitement of starting something brand new. The woman who had once cried in a shelter's shared bathroom now stood with her hands on her belly, smiling into a mirror at the mother she was about to become. Friends she thought she had lost reappeared, offering strollers, baby clothes, and warm meals. Some apologized for not being there when she needed them most. Lena didn't hold grudges. She accepted their kindness and let her circle grow again, smaller, but more genuine. One rainy afternoon, as Lena folded fresh laundry near the window, there was a knock at the door. She opened it slowly and froze. Standing there, umbrella in hand, was Adrien's mother. Older than Lena remembered, her eyes were softer now, lined with regret. She didn't ask to come in immediately. Instead, she held out a small box. "These were Adrien's baby clothes," she said quietly. "I kept them all these years. I heard everything. I'm so sorry, Lena." Lena hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. They sat awkwardly at first, but conversation flowed soon enough. The older woman admitted she hadn't known the full story. "If I had known what he did, I would have come sooner." She looked at the cribs and wept. "These babies deserve better than what he gave you." Lena listened, touched but guarded. She wasn't ready to decide how involved Adrien's family would be, but she knew one thing for sure: every child needed people who truly wanted to love them. And maybe, just maybe, forgiveness could start in small ways, like a quiet conversation over tea. In the weeks that followed, Adrien's mother visited twice more. She never overstayed, never overstepped. She brought home-cooked meals and fresh diapers, sometimes sitting in silence just folding baby blankets. Lena watched her closely, how gently she moved, how cautiously she asked questions. One afternoon, while adjusting the mobile above the cribs, Lena finally said, "I'm not doing this for him. But if you want to know them, you can." The older woman's eyes filled with tears, and she simply nodded. It wasn't dramatic. There was no grand moment. Just an understanding that even broken families can plant seeds of something new. Lena wasn't forgetting what had happened. But she believed that sometimes, forgiveness wasn't about absolution, it was about choosing peace over poison. And in allowing Adrien's mother a space in their lives, she felt a weight she didn't know she carried begin to lift. The labor came suddenly, in the early hours of a quiet Sunday morning. Lena had just finished a journal entry when the first wave of pain took her breath away. She called the taxi herself, gripping her bag and waddling downstairs, one hand pressed against her belly. The nurses were kind, calm, and encouraging. Hours passed, contractions deepened, and the room filled with beeping monitors and murmured instructions. When the first cry rang out, Lena sobbed, loudly, uncontrollably. And then came the second. 2 cries. 2 perfect daughters. She named them Hope and Mira. Holding them for the first time was nothing like she imagined, it was more. Their tiny faces scrunched, their skin soft and pink, their eyes blinking toward the light. Lena kissed each forehead and whispered promises. You are wanted. You are enough. You are loved. For all the darkness that had brought them to this point, the moment felt bathed in something holy. Not perfect, not painless, but beautiful. In those first few hours, as she cradled them both against her chest, Lena finally allowed herself to believe she had done it. She was their mother now. And no one could take that from her. After the twins came home, life became a blur of bottles, lullabies, and late-night cries. But Lena didn't mind the exhaustion. She paced the small apartment with a baby in each arm, humming softly, rocking them through teething and tummy aches. Her work slowed, but never stopped. She designed during their naps, answering emails between feedings. Some clients waited patiently. Others didn't. Still, she pressed on, building her portfolio, her income, and her confidence. Inspired by her experience, Lena began drafting stories, children's stories, rooted in courage, resilience, and love. She illustrated them herself, creating characters based on her daughters and the journey that brought them into the world. When she self-published her first book, a small blog featured her story. The response was overwhelming. Other single mothers wrote in, thanking her for giving their struggles a voice. Bookstores began requesting copies. What started as a healing exercise became a movement. And in every corner of her growing success, Lena reminded herself, this didn't happen in spite of her pain, but because of how she transformed it. Lena's self-published book gained momentum far faster than she imagined. What started as a small feature on a parenting blog turned into a cascade of interviews, podcast invitations, and book signings. Her story was different, not because it was rare, but because she had told it with raw honesty and hope. A national parenting magazine called her the voice for mothers rebuilding from the ashes, and soon, an independent publisher offered to republish her book with wider distribution. Lena agreed, carefully reading every clause, making sure she remained in control of her narrative. As her readership grew, so did her message. Schools asked her to speak to teenage girls about strength, independence, and the importance of self-worth. Women's shelters invited her to host workshops. One afternoon, while rocking Hope to sleep, her phone buzzed with a message from the Regional Women's Conference. They wanted her as a keynote speaker. She stared at the screen, disbelief in her eyes. She hadn't set out to become a public figure. But now that her voice had found a place, she knew she'd use it to uplift others who still felt invisible. The conference was held in a bright hall lined with banners that read Empower, Uplift, Transform. Lena stood backstage, nerves fluttering in her stomach despite the dozens of talks she'd already given. As she walked out and faced the packed room, her eyes scanned the crowd. Midway through her speech, about rebuilding from betrayal and the unexpected strength found in motherhood, she noticed a man sitting in the third row. Not Adrien. Someone else. He wasn't taking notes like the others. He just watched her, really watched her, like her words meant something personal. After the event, as she signed books and answered questions, he approached her slowly. "Hi," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm Daniel. I'm a pediatric nurse, and a single parent, too." He held out a copy of her book. "I'd be honored if you signed it for my daughter." Lena smiled, touched by his sincerity. She wrote a note and handed it back. Their conversation was brief, but something about it lingered. He didn't look at her like a woman who had been broken. He looked at her like someone who had rebuilt herself brick by brick, and he respected every inch of it. Daniel and Lena began exchanging emails, then texts, then regular calls. He never pushed. He asked about the girls, not in a polite way but with genuine interest, what they were learning, what made them laugh, how Lena was holding up. It was refreshing, this steady presence, this lack of drama. When they finally met for coffee weeks later, it felt natural, like catching up with someone she'd known for years. He brought his daughter, Zoe, a shy but sweet 7-year-old with freckles and big eyes. The girls took to each other easily, and soon, Lena and Daniel's lives began to intertwine. She didn't call it love at first. It felt different, safer, slower, and real. He never questioned her past or tried to fix her. He just stood beside her, steady and kind. He once told her, "The strongest people aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who rise without bitterness." Lena didn't need saving. She'd already saved herself. But having someone who saw her strength and admired it? That was new. That was healing. Together, they weren't trying to create a perfect life. They were building something honest, something grounded in mutual respect and quiet hope. It happened on an overcast afternoon, during a book signing at a local bookstore. The line was long, filled with mothers, readers, and young girls holding her story close to their chests. Then, at the end of the line, she saw him. Adrien. His hair was shorter now, his face more hollow. He wore a forced smile and carried nothing in his hands. When he reached her table, Lena kept her voice calm. "Why are you here?" she asked. He glanced around nervously. I wanted to see them. The girls." Lena stared at him for a moment. "You lost that right the day you laughed at me in my own home," she said, her voice even. Adrien's smile faltered. "I made mistakes," he muttered. "I'm not here to fight." Lena shook her head. "You don't get to rewrite history." She stood and handed her book to the next reader, signaling the conversation was over. Adrien turned and walked away slowly, swallowed by the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear or pain, just release. She'd needed that moment, not for revenge, but to close the last chapter of a story that no longer belonged to him. Years passed, but the memories remained. Lena often sat on her back porch, a mug in her hands, watching Hope and Mira play beneath the maple tree in their modest backyard. Their laughter was music. Daniel sat nearby, reading while Zoe painted flowers on the patio floor with chalk. Life wasn't perfect. There were still bills, tantrums, and sleepless nights, but it was full, rich, and deeply honest. Lena had found her peace not in someone else's apology, but in her own ability to forgive, grow, and rebuild something beautiful from the broken pieces. She no longer lived in the shadow of what was done to her. Instead, She stood in the light of what she chose to become. She told her story not to reopen wounds, but to remind others that pain doesn't get the final say. Love does. Courage does. And resilience does. As the wind carried the sound of her daughter's laughter across the yard, Lena closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "This was never the life I planned, but it's the one I was meant to live." And with that, she smiled, fully, freely, and without fear.